All right. So now we're going to talk about some language characteristics of children with hearing impairments. It's important to know these characteristics we're talking about in this first section. I refer to those with untreated hearing loss. So if we do not treat hearing loss with amplification, cochlear implants, or accommodations, these are some of the things we will find. It is based on research that's pretty old, and now a lot of our research kind of shifted to studying the effects of hearing aids and CIs and stuff. But before we had that technology, we followed child outcomes over time. And that is why the characteristics we're talking about here in this little section were established by research 40 to 50 years ago. So there's some important stuff to know. Okay. Early studies reported that morphosyntax was severely delayed and that many people used immature morphosyntax for much longer, and many people never reached adult level competency in morphosyntax. However, lots of that early research was happening without giving those children with hearing impairments any accommodations at all. So they were in like regular education classrooms with tons of background noise and stuff like that. So of course they did not score well. So the book goes on to talk about how we need much more research in this area. Also, children with hearing loss both have a smaller vocabulary, and that vocabulary is not as complex as their normally hearing peers. Sometimes vocab was delayed 4 to 5 years, and this delay kind of makes sense when you think about how children learn vocabulary. Almost all of our vocabulary is not explicitly taught to us, right? But rather we learn it from hearing and being exposed to vocabulary in our daily life. But depending on the severity of a hearing loss, that is more difficult for some children. Therefore, children with hearing loss often need to be explicitly taught more vocabulary, and that is difficult to do in practice because of so many words that we do use. So teaching all of them is very, very difficult. So that's why we see a gap in vocabulary that kind of widens as children with hearing loss get older, and the effects are seen, especially in high school, when textbooks start to use a lot of complicated academic language. So speaking of pragmatics, there's not a lot of research in this area because we weren't really interested in social skills that much, like 40 to 50 years ago. But what we do have indicated that many hearing impaired children fail to learn the rules that govern conversation, such as turn taking, repair strategies, clarification, and topic negotiation. And this ends up going back to how children learn language, right? Not through that incidental exposure, not just being around it, picking it up in daily life, but instead through explicit in-class practice and drilling and stuff. And so it's really hard to translate those skills into conversation if you're just being taught them kind of one-on-one, drill and kill kind of way. So reading and writing is difficult because when typically hearing children are learning to read, we rely on language that we've heard, but that is not the case for those with more severe cases of hearing loss, right? So for that reason, a significantly unfortunate trend reported that these children, that the reading levels generally did not develop beyond the 4th grade level. But this research, again, 40, 50 years old, was focused on those with severe or profound hearing loss and not those with milder degrees of hearing loss. So it really depends. Okay. So speech production is most affected by the degree of hearing loss with both segmental and suprasegmental errors. So the segmental errors are like errors with consonant and vowels, and suprasegmental errors are errors in timing, intonation, and stress, those kinds of things. So at milder levels, we see more of just segmental errors, but as it gets more severe, we see more errors with suprasegmental features like pitch, speaking rate, breath control, stuff like that. So errors arise from issues being able to discriminate a specific sound. So we see differences arise very early, and studies show that infants with profound hearing loss babble differently. The babbling may consist of certain vowels or consonants rather than the vowel consonant syllables that we talked about earlier. Reduplicated babbling starts later or never occurs. And we might see issues particularly with alveolar sounds. And the more, you might see more babbling with labial sounds instead of those alveolar. It's a little more visual because you can see kind of the lips moving, and so it's easier to imitate versus an alveolar sound, which is your tongue's kind of hidden behind your teeth and stuff. So you can review table 8.2 for more details on some of that stuff. Okay, I will have you watch this video on your slides, and then I'll go ahead and throw in a question there that you can answer about it, okay? Don't worry about this kind of question here, okay? I'm gonna throw it into the whole play pause it form. Okay. This, 1 second. Okay, so when we talk about early intervention for children with hearing loss, we're talking about a few things. We're talking about an accurate and early diagnosis. We're talking about the fitting of appropriate amplification, early specialized education, and early speech and language intervention. And after we get those things early, it is important to note that many will need those services throughout school. So we'll first talk about one of those steps, which is finding appropriate amplification, and we'll discuss 3 options for doing so. And those are hearing aids, cochlear implants, and assistive listening devices. So hearing aids provide auditory input for children with significant hearing loss, but can sometimes be recommended for children with lesser hearing losses as well. So the most common type of hearing aid for children is the behind the ear type, where it looks like a small crescent shaped case behind your ear. I'm sure you guys have seen those. Most molds, including the behind the ear, that BTE, requires a customized ear mold that fits snugly in the ear and does not. And if it does not fit or is jarred loose, the child will get like a feedback or high pitched squeal that definitely interfere with hearing for that child, and it's usually audible for other children as well. So one thing here to note is that because a child is growing, it's important to get that refit pretty frequently. And I think it depends on how old you are. The younger you are, you kind of go every 3 months, I think. And then as you get into kind of elementary school age, you growing a little slower. Your head's not growing as much, I should say. You get that fit like every 6 months. There's a chart that is laid out in the book better than what I just said. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check that out. Another amplification method is the cochlear implant. And I like this text from the book. This quote from the book. It says, the development of the cochlear implant represents the single greatest advance in technology for individuals with significant hearing loss in recent years. So we used to just give it to adults, but now we can fit babies under 12 months with cochlear implants. It uses electrodes implanted into the cochlea, where it delivers electrical signals to the 8th of the auditory nerve, bypassing damaged hair cells. So success of the CI with the cochlear implant on language and literacy outcomes depends on many factors, such as the age of onset of the hearing loss, the status of the individual's hearing mechanism, the age at which the device is acquired, the time span since acquiring the device, the amount of intervention that you got with the device, and a child's family characteristics, as well as a child's characteristics such as like intellectual level and personality that can all work together to influence children's performances and outcomes. So it's important to know that when we're providing therapy for those kids, that the success is not just on one thing, but it really is a factor of many different things. And all those things I just listed kind of play a part in that. I'll let you watch this video on your own time. It's a really good intro to cochlear implants. Okay. Now I'll let you watch that video as well. I think it is it's worth a watch. I'll throw a question in there as well to answer about it. Okay. So conversations about intervention must first account for family wishes, right? And specifically how the family wants the child to communicate. And this can be a difficult conversation for families, or a difficult conversation for us to have with families, especially if the parents have a hearing loss as well. So we might think that if we have these tools to help children talk and listen, then that should be what we do, right? But there is a pride in being deaf. You'll see often like deaf with a capital D, and that's that pride in being a part of a deaf community. as it's a way of life, a culture. And it's important to understand that when we're having these conversations with parents. So because our goal with any child is that they become proficient with a language, whether that is English, Spanish, ASL, or whatever, we must consider that if a parent has a significant hearing loss and uses ASL, then ASL should be maybe that targeted language. And we can kind of put aside some of these other skills, at least initially. So, however, the issue kind of arises for many professionals when the language family uses at home differs from the language that we need to read and write. And that issue is that the majority of hearing impaired children are born to parents who have normal hearing. So if the parents were American, their native language would likely be English, communicated through like an auditory oral mode. So in these cases, most of the children cannot acquire language solely through that auditory oral channel, right? Therefore, most traditional intervention choices for the children who have manual forms of communication included, such as ASL. So best communication modalities is still being debated, with research showing one is better than the other is like remains really controversial. So what we will recommend here, simply put, is that our best strategy for deciding on one way of communicating, whether that's total communication or just ASL or whatever, is just to give the parents all the information we have and letting them decide without pushing them one way or another. And giving them all the information, letting them make a decision themselves, because it involves a lot of things that we're not privy to as clinicians. So one popular way that we can recommend that we can help with SSLPs is total communication, which uses things like sign, even finger spelling, spoken language to convey meaning, therefore incorporating the use of visual, manual, and auditory systems. So depending on the modality chosen, we can target communication skills with different approaches. The first is this LSL approach, so listening and spoken language approach, which is based on a philosophy that children can and must be taught to develop listening function, and with intense intervention, we'll be able to develop spoken language. It stresses that hearing is learning, and providing opportunities to hear is giving the child the best chance at allowing their brain to develop and subsequently acquire language and literacy skills. So early intervention includes development of pre-speech and language skills with listening as a foundation. Here, in the child's age doesn't matter. We can work on it at any point. The LSL approach often goes alongside the use of CIs, or cochlear implants, as those with cochlear implants have faster rates of language learning and higher overall language achievement compared to those who used hearing aids, one study found. So a good example and comparison of these interventions is in this link here for that speech services for hearing loss. So I recommend you click on that and check it out. Just a quick little read there. Okay. So kind of on the other side of the spectrum, we have learning through vision and sidestepping the need for hearing aids. It is based on the philosophy that children who are deaf use sign language because they cannot hear, simply put. And so the eyes are how they learn primarily. And so in the US, commonly we teach ASL for language and teach written English as a second language. So there are pros and cons to that, right? As you can expect. Okay. So continuing on with the visual learning and manual communication, choosing this approach means that families have to be committed to learning sign as well, so they can communicate at home. This is a whole thing. A whole family has to kind of buy in on this, or rely on, or have to be forced to rely on an interpreter. So if families do that and the child gets proper instruction, then we have research that shows that language development mirrors the oral development of their typically hearing peers. So this decision is made while considering that a child might not be able to communicate with people outside of that small community, and that they will have to learn and to write and read English as well as learning this ASL. And they, like we said before, it's like a second language. So it is a whole lot is involved in this, in choosing this approach. But again, if you are considering deaf culture and considering family wishes, and this is what you'll hear, we'll talk about, and you'll see it in a video in a little bit, but it's important to consider that the family might want these things as well. It might be very important to who they are, their way of life as well. Okay. All right, I recommend you check out this video. Very cool video in Black American Sign Language, how that differs. Okay. So last unit, we established the importance of assessment and regular progress monitoring. And so there are important considerations needed for children with hearing loss in that respect. First, we must ensure that audiologists periodically evaluate and monitor levels of hearing loss. We must consistently monitor speech and language / literacy development, checking for stagnation or major drops in skills that might be the result of faulty or inconsistent use of an amplification device. So it's always important to consider that. And before any of that, we got to make sure that we can teach through talking to our child and having them be able to listen to us, and making sure they can hear sounds that are different frequencies and not just some frequencies. And so one way we do that is through this like Ling 6 sound test. So you can watch these videos on your own. And the Ling 6 sound test indicates a child's ability to detect all aspects of speech through the sounds, either ah, ee, oo, sh, and I feel like that's 5, whatever. You can watch the videos and there are examples in there. Because those 6 sounds encompass the frequency range of all phonemes. So we're not, we know they can hear and indicate all of them, or we know that, okay, they can't hear these ones, and we can make decisions from that. Okay. Another common intervention approach for young children with hearing loss is this LTL, which is learning to listen. And it's a strategy that helps babies detect, discriminate, and say specific sounds and phrases that are specifically targeted to help babies reach certain developmental milestones. So some examples would include saying moo for cow, or choo choo for train. And they also include phrases like wave bye-bye, or that's yummy. So we're really teaching specific sounds with actions to kind of help build that connection. And so as children begin to repeat these sounds and eventually string words together, they should be exposed to the listening and language behaviors. I've included this link in here as well, that Hearing First link, and it kind of outlines this in a really digestible way. Okay. I think that is it for this little lesson today. You've already done some videos if you're watching this. Done some kind of fill in the blank kind of stuff. But yeah, so don't forget topic activity 7. That's due next Tuesday. Excuse me. I look forward to discussing this section a little further. If you guys have any questions, we can talk about it on Tuesday. But I look forward to viewing your responses and seeing if you guys have any questions. Thank you guys.